Hey guys, Keith here. Okay, time for a release video. Been very slack lately, been way too busy building stuff and not enough time documenting stuff. So we're going all the way back to April to 2019.19 and going through to 2019.32. The build I'll use in this presentation is actually a little bit beyond 32, but that's okay. A couple of bugs are fixed, you may or may not notice. Because there are so many things to go through, there's literally 133 lines here of things to cover, and I've already filtered out all the bugs, and we're focusing purely on the enhancements. What I'm going to do is I'm going to break this video into several parts. I'm going to start by talking about the setup changes, then we'll go to the layout, the sequencer, and the scheduler and whatever, and hopefully it tries to limit how boring the video gets, because I know people struggle with the release videos if they get long, which they always do. Anyway, so let's kick off, and we'll start at the beginning. We'll go back here to make E131 default for multiple universes. This one was interesting because when I made this change, I got something from Dan saying, I wish I'd done that years ago. And so do I. For a long time now, when you added in multiple universes here, it doesn't matter if they're multicast or unicast, this checkbox here wasn't selected. And so when you added the universes, you got 10 universes, which I guess for those of you that like to see all your universes was kind of useful. But it's actually quite inefficient in terms of screen real estate, particularly as your shows get larger, and most people never notice the checkbox. So now what we've done is we've changed the default so the checkbox is defaulted, and when you click OK, you get one line for your 10 universes. Everything else is the same. It behaves the same as if you define 10 separate lines. The only difference is obviously you can't add a separate description or something against each line item. The reason we've gone this way is a couple of fold. One is it tends to force you to keep your universes together and be consistent. The other thing is, as we're moving more towards protocols like DDP and ZCPP, which are more controller level protocols where everything goes across in a big block, getting into the habit of allocating your universes to be consistent sized and in a big block, etc., really helps. Now, you still have the flexibility if you still want to go in there and define them independently, knock yourself out, but we believe this is a better default configuration, and so we've enhanced it to make that the default and get away from people having to remember to do it. Adding the controller type to the dialogue. So you'll have seen this if you've recently added E131 as well. There's now a controller type field here where we list a number of common type controllers. There's also an unknown for any other controller, and this list is not complete. We know that. It will build out over time, but this is part of the beginnings of a push to make the setup tab more controller aware. And start to manage things as if you're dealing with controllers rather than dealing with lower level concepts like universes and channels, etc. We want you to get up and start to deal with things as a controller and let xLights start to do some of the heavy lifting for you, which is often a point where people get lost and confused. And so we believe that this is a better way to go. One of the side effects of doing this, if you choose a particular controller type, is when you do come in here and you do the upload to controller, you'll find that this menu gets a lot simpler, because no longer at this point do you need to tell it what sort of controller you're talking to. It comes in and it says, well, I actually know exactly what sort of controller that you're talking to, and so here are your options. So that's one side effect. There is some other side effect, and we'll come to that later. Yes, pixel stick upload will honor color order, gamma, etc., etc. So some time ago, we've spoken about this before. When you define a model in xLights now, there are a bunch of additional controller connection properties once you come down here, and you define it on a port, you get the ability to set a number of properties, and these properties are not applied in xLights. They're actually you describing them in xLights so that xLights can then upload it to your controller if you choose to do so. If you're not going to upload to your controller, there's no point setting these properties. They don't do anything. But now in this particular change here, the ES Pixel Stick uploader has been changed to actually upload these properties and configure the Pixel Stick. So if you want to set the brightness on the Pixel Stick, you can configure it here, upload it to the Pixel Stick, and it will set the configuration on the Pixel Stick to match whatever is here. That's what that one is saying. This one here, this one is a little bit controversial because I'm not sure I entirely agree with it, but Dan's gone and made it so that when you do the upload to the Falcon controller, if the Falcon controller is currently in absolute mode, it will stay in absolute mode. And I think there was a fix a little bit later from Scott where on some of the older firmwares, this was causing some issues. And so on some of the older firmware versions with the Falcon, he still switches it to universe and start channel mode instead of leaving it in absolute mode. Prior to this change that Dan made, it was always switching it to universe and start channel mode, which is still, if I'm doing E131 on the Falcon controller, that's kind of my preference, but obviously Dan prefers otherwise. And so this way, it stops xLights from overriding and forcing your Falcon into a mode that you don't want it to be in. Upgrade J1 Sys P12 support. Yeah, much like there's a couple of things in this one. So much like the ES Pixel Stick, I think there's a couple of these properties that are now supported on the J1 Sys, not very many. It's a very old firmware, so there's obviously a lot less capabilities. But part of this change is we've expanded the number of configurations of your models, which you can now upload to the J1 Sys if that's what you're doing. So for example, if you've got a mega tree, let's say you've got a mega tree like this, and let's imagine you've only got 4 strings of 200 pixels folded 4 times, okay, and you put it on output 1. And if you grab this star here, and if you were also to put that on output 4, which is obviously the same as the end of the tree, and if you were to change the start channel of the tree to be the first universe, and you were to change the star start channel to be not number 1, but the end of the tree. Okay, so now what it's saying is strings 1 to 4, sorry, strings 1 to 3 are going to be 200 pixels long because they're in the tree definition, but the last string of the tree is actually going to be 250 long because it joins into the star. That's what that's saying. Well, now with the enhanced upload to the J1 system, this works with the Falcons and the SanDevices and everything else, it will now be able to upload this configuration and it will configure the controller correctly. Other models is if you've got a custom model with more than 1 string, this change here will ensure that when you're doing that upload to the J1 Sys, it will be able to work out and properly configure the J1 Sys controller for those various settings. Prior to this change, it was still working with some of the older algorithms which supported a more limited set of configurations for upload. One of these days I will find the time to sit down and do a more comprehensive video of exactly what the controller upload can and can't support, and obviously if you're at Expo next month, in a couple of weeks now, we'll go through that with you and you'll get a great understanding of exactly how that works. The SanDevice types to the controller types dialog, we've already seen that dialog. Scott added in the SanDevices controllers. He also enhanced the SanDevices upload to support all of those properties for the upload. So all of these properties down here now correctly upload to the SanDevices controller. So lots of enhancements on controller upload automation. add a manual link to the help menu. What that means is in the help menu here, you can click on the user manual and it will take you to the internet, where it will take you to where the manual is currently located on manual.xlights.org. Takes a little while to load. Now the guys have been doing some work on this, so that there are updates to the manual that that you may not have realised. A lot of people think that the manual's static and hasn't been updated in a long time, but I know some people have been doing some updates, and this is more of a real-time update to the manual, so definitely worthwhile checking out. All right, let's keep going. Here we go. Enhance controller connection bulk edit to allow editing just one property. Okay, so yeah, not really a setup tab thing, but that's okay. What that means here is that now when you select multiple, it used to have a bulk edit here for controller connection, and all of these things were all embedded inside the controller connection. It didn't actually make a great deal of sense when you think about it, because you may want to just change the brightness and not set everything else the same. And so now this works that way. So it comes in and you can just set that one property and set it to, I don't know, 50% or something. And now all of the models down here will have 50% set as the brightness. And so the previous way didn't really make a lot of sense unless we're just setting which port the particular prop was on. So that was a little bit confusing. Anyway, that's fixed as well. It should have been on the layout though, but that's okay. We'll keep going. What else we got on the setup tab? Setup tab, setup tab, setup tab. ZCPP. Let me come back to that at the end, because it's kind of a big topic all on its own. Bulk edit of controller type. You saw us setting the controller type earlier. Now, if you had multiple entries here, so if I came into here and added unicast 192.168.0.2, I don't know, let's start it at universe 11. Let's add 10 more universe. Whoops. Okay, but if I wanted to grab both of these lines, I can now right click on here and go bulk edit type and set them both to be Falcon F16 v3. So if you do have multiple lines and you want to set the controller type for all of them, you can now bulk edit it, which you couldn't do previously. Add a uniqueness check where auto sizing is enabled. Okay, so auto size is a concept, and we'll come to it in ZCPP as well, but it's a concept that Scott's also introduced here. Using auto start channels, and basically what it's going to do is it's going to auto arrange all of the models onto your universe. So the downside of this is it means you won't always realize that everything's been shuffled around and your controller may not work, and so you'll have to upload to your controller a little bit more frequently. So it's a little bit quirky to use on E131. When we get to ZCPP, you'll see why this makes a lot more sense in the ZCPP world. But basically what you're saying to xLights is saying, don't force me to manage the start channels. You manage the start channels for me. Move my models around however you might need to from a start channel perspective. Just make them all work on-side my controller. And your only responsibility is to make sure that you've allocated enough universes. This only makes sense if you've got your universes grouped together. You can't really do this if you've separated all your universes out. One thing that you do need if you're going to go this way is you must give your controller a name, and that your name must be unique and that IP address must be unique. If you don't do that, then so the auto layout stuff's not going to work, because it's generally built off the controller name, and if you've got multiple outputs going to the same IP address, it obviously doesn't have full control over what's going on, and it all ends badly. So that's why those rules are in place. the final change here is the FPP proxy configuration, and Dan actually made a video on this, so I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on this. I suggest you go and find Dan Culp's video and watch it. But basically what he's done is he's allowed you to put in the IP address of a Falcon Pi player. So let's imagine your controller is out there in your show, but you don't send data to it directly. Instead, what you do is you maybe send a synchronization. So you've got a master Pi sending out wirelessly synchronization packets to a bunch of Pis in your show, and then those Pis are running your Falcon controllers. Or maybe your show network is just sitting behind a Pi and you've got a wireless connection into your Pi, but then all the wired connections go out to your show and you can't actually directly see your controllers because you're obviously not on the same network. And so when you try to do the upload, either it doesn't work or you have to go and do a bunch of work to proxy everything and make sure that your computer knows how to reach those controllers, which are on this separate network hidden behind your Falcon Pi player. So what Dan's done is he's introduced this concept where the Falcon Pi player will act as a proxy for that network. And so let's imagine my Falcon Pi player was 192.168.0.4, and let's imagine this was on the, I don't know, the 27.1 network, so an entirely different network. So this Pi is on my network, the one that my computer is on, and this one is on a network which I can't get to because it's hidden behind this Pi. And what this does is it basically allows you to talk to that controller, do uploads to that controller, etc., from within xLights without having to actually have physical access to that controller. And it's all done by proxying through the Falcon Pi player, which is a pretty smart way of doing it. It's pretty clever. But watch Dan's video. Dan goes through it in a much more progressive, systematic way, explaining and showing you it working. I don't actually have a Pi set up here right now at the moment that I could demo it on. So definitely go and watch Dan's video. All right, so that leaves us with zero configuration pixel protocol. So zero configuration pixel protocol is down here. You would normally so first of all, you're going to need a controller that supports the protocol. That's kind of hard to have right now because it really is only supported by 2 controllers. The latest firmware for the Pixel Stick has ZCPP support. And the new Falcon controller for firmware, which is not released yet, so you're going to need at least beta 23. Or above to use it. Now, I think beta 22 does have ZCPP in it, but the protocol did change before after that, and so that firmware will not work with ZCPP. But we can demo it here without even having a controller connected, so you can start to get some of the concepts. So normally you'd press the discover button, it will go out onto the network, it'll find all your Pis, it'll find all your Falcons, etc., and it would have brought back a ZCPP entry. It would come back with an IP address, so it would have an IP address like so. Actually, let's send it to an address that doesn't exist. It would typically come back with just the single channel. It would come back with the description of the controller, but you can, of course, come in here and change it. Let's call him Fred. It will typically come back with auto size output set on, and I would generally suggest that you do set it on. If the controller supports virtual strings, which in the case of the Falcon it does, obviously the Pixel Stick doesn't, so this would come back selected. And it may also come back saying it supports smart remotes. Now, the firmware that I'm using at the moment doesn't support that yet, so that would not be checked. The multicast will be checked if you go and discover a Pixel Stick, because multicast generally works better when you're using wireless devices, and so it would default to multicast. Basically, the controller has come back to xLights and said, I'm here, this is how I'd like you to configure me. I work better with multicast, so it automatically configures. and then a priority. A priority basically allows you to have multiple sources sending data to the same controller, and the controller will take the highest priority's data that's arriving. So if you'd hit discovery, this is generally what you would have got, a simple entry with a single channel. Now the concept of ZCPP is you don't touch it at this point. What you would do now is you would come over to the layout and you would want to start to put your models in and associate them with the controller. The way you do it in ZCPP is slightly different. Instead of saying using the start channel, you actually choose the controller name. So you say this model is on Fred, the controller. In fact, we can put them all onto Fred because, of course, you can set the controller name in a bulk edit and everything is now on Fred, which is great. You will start to see some of these errors start to pop up, which we will need to address. So the next thing you need to do is you need to make sure that the port is set and the protocol is set. Now, if you hadn't set those, again, they would come up red to say that's illegal. You must define those if you're going to use ZCPP. The next thing that you'll notice is that here we had 3 props that were all connected on the same connection, and it's come up and it's saying this is not right. And if you look up here, notice how all of these models now have exactly the same start channel. Well, this is star 2 and this is star 3, and star 3 is actually not in the same place, and it's because it's not connected directly to the controller. It's connected to the end of star 2. So we just have to come in here and say it's connected to the end of star 2, and it's now automatically updated the start channel. And this one here is obviously connected to the end of star 3. Done. Okay, so we've gone and we've configured all of this. You'll notice that all the start channels have been automatically sorted out. You can see it's using 3,000 channels. If we come back to the setup tab, miraculously the setup tab has been auto-sized to 3,000 channels. It has automatically reconfigured it. And if I come over here and I add another prop, I like stars, but let's add an arch. Just so you can see it when it happens when you add one again. Again, you come down, you say what controller it's on. Immediately it wants to know, hang on a second, what port's it on? We're going to put this on port 6. The protocol all defaults, everything's good. You can see it's put it there. What if I was to, I don't know, what if I was to throw another star on and add it to the end of port 5? So let's add another star on. Again, we're going to put it on controller Fred, but this time we're going to put it on 5. So the first thing you'll notice is that it's output 5. Okay. Yes. So you can see it's chained it to the end of star 4 automatically. You'll also notice that it pushed arches down in its start channel and it put star 5 above. And the reason for that is it auto arranges the models in the most efficient layout for the controller so that everything is in order. It doesn't make a huge amount of difference, but the controller runs a little bit more efficiently if it doesn't have to be moving data around all over the place. And so it auto arranges everything. And of course, if we go back to setup tab, of course, it's added another 300 channels to support the star. So that's the concept. The concept is that 2 things. One, everything's automatic. You describe a model's properties in a way that is much more natural. You say what controller you've plugged it into, you say what port you plugged it into, what protocol those pixels are, and if you chain them together, you describe the order in which you've chained them together. And that's it. There's nothing else for you to configure. Now, if you go and set these properties, etc., it will automatically work out how to configure the controller to support this. So then how do you go and configure the controller? Well, you go and configure the controller by coming up to here, up to here, and turning on output to lights. As soon as you turn on output to lights, it will automatically upload this configuration of all of these props, etc., to the controller, and your controller will be immediately configured and ready to run. In fact, if you have output to lights on here, and you come down here and you change the number of pixels on this prop, right? As soon as you press enter then and you've changed the number of pixels to 40, it immediately reconfigures the controller and it will actually light up those 40 pixels to show you that those pixels are working. So, if you're not sure how many pixels you've got on your prop and you're playing with the properties of your model, etc., it will all happen for you as you do the setup. That's the idea. The idea is you never have to actually go to your controller to configure everything, because you can configure it in xLights. And as soon as you turn on output to lights, it configures your show for you automatically and it just starts playing. You don't have to muck around. So belaboring the point, I know. That's it for all the changes in the setup tab. So what I'll do is I'm going to cut this video here and then we will come back and we will cover off the changes in the layout tab, even though we've kind of touched on some of them already. So thanks, guys.